My name is Hannah Brooks, and I was 36 years old on the night my 11-year-old niece, Olivia, called me from a hospital waiting room nearly 3 hours away. The call came in at 11:17 p.m. I was sitting at my kitchen table finishing some paperwork and was just about to let it go to voicemail because the number wasn't saved in my phone. But for some reason, I answered it. Later, I realized that single decision would change everything. The moment I picked up, all I could hear was the distant sound of a television and the low murmur of people talking somewhere in the background. Then a small voice spoke. "Aunt Hannah?" My heart immediately sank. I knew that voice. "Olivia?" I asked. There was a brief pause before she answered. "Yeah." The way she said it instantly told me something was wrong. It wasn't because she sounded scared. What terrified me most was that she sounded completely exhausted and broken. When children are in trouble, they usually cry, panic, or get angry. But Olivia sounded like someone who had already given up on expecting help. I pushed my chair back and stood up immediately. "What happened?" I asked. After a few seconds of silence, she quietly said, "I think Grandma forgot about me." For a moment, I thought I had heard her wrong. "What do you mean?" I asked. "She dropped me off at the hospital this morning because I wasn't feeling well," Olivia said softly. "She told me she'd come back sometime after lunch." My heart started racing. "Where are you right now?" I asked. "At the hospital." "You're still there?" "Yeah, I think almost everyone left." I glanced at the clock, 11:17 p.m. Without thinking, I grabbed my car keys. "Are you alone?" I asked. "Not completely," she replied. "There are still a few people here." "Has a nurse talked to you?" "Yeah, one of the nurses gave me some crackers." The way she said that pierced straight through my heart. She sounded grateful for those crackers. I told her to stay exactly where she was and not go anywhere. Then I promised I was coming to get her. Before hanging up, she asked a question that stayed in my mind for months afterward. "Are you really coming?" For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Not because I didn't have an answer, but because I couldn't understand why an 11-year-old child sounded surprised that someone would come for her. Finally, I said, "Of course I'm coming." Then I ended the call and walked out the door. The drive felt unusually long. Rain tapped steadily against the windshield, while highway lights disappeared behind me in the darkness. With every mile, my mind kept replaying the last 18 months. 18 months earlier, my younger brother Ethan and his wife Melissa had been killed in a trucking accident. Olivia survived only because she hadn't been with them that day. After the funeral, my parents took her into their home. At the time, everyone agreed it was the best decision. They had a large house, financial stability, plenty of time, and most importantly, they constantly reminded everyone how much they loved their granddaughter. At first, I believed them. Whenever I called, they told me Olivia was adjusting wonderfully. Every time I offered to let her stay with me for a few days, there was always an excuse. She needs consistency. Too much change will upset her. Every explanation sounded perfectly reasonable. Later, I learned that the most dangerous lies are often the ones that sound completely logical. Around midnight, I called my mother. No answer. I called again, straight to voicemail. Then I called my father. Same result. A strange feeling settled in my stomach and stayed with me the entire drive. By the time I arrived at the hospital, it was nearly 2 a.m. The emergency entrance was almost empty. Inside, the receptionist pointed me toward the waiting room. I recognized Olivia immediately. She was curled up in a chair. Her backpack sat beside her, and a half-eaten package of crackers rested in her lap. The moment she saw me, she stood up. She didn't cry. She didn't run into my arms. The only thing on her face was relief, and somehow that was what broke my heart the most. I wrapped my arms around her and held her tightly. She felt thinner than I remembered. Not dramatically thinner, just enough for me to notice. When we pulled apart, I asked, "Where's Grandma?" She shrugged, "I don't know." "Did she say where she was going?" Olivia shook her head. "Shopping." I stared at her for several seconds. "Shopping?" "Yeah," she said. "She told me she'd be back in a little while." A little while. I looked up at the clock hanging in the waiting room. It was 2 a.m. And for the first time, I realized that maybe this story wasn't anything like the one I'd been hearing for the past 18 months. I walked out of the hospital with Olivia, and it was still raining. The night had grown even darker, and the parking lot was almost completely empty. We made our way to the car in silence. She was so exhausted that the moment she sat down, her eyes started drifting shut. But I didn't want to take her straight home. She had told me she was hungry, and from the way she had talked about those crackers, I could tell she hadn't had a proper meal in hours. So before getting back on the highway, I stopped at a small 24-hour diner. A waitress came over, smiled, and placed menus in front of us. Olivia barely looked at hers for more than a few seconds before pointing to the cheapest item on the menu. Chicken noodle soup, that was it. No drink, no dessert, nothing else. I slid the menu back toward her. "Order whatever you want," I said. She looked at me like she didn't quite believe me. "Really?" she asked. I nodded. "Really?" A few seconds later, she ordered a burger, French fries, and a milkshake. When the food arrived, she started eating immediately. She wasn't eating like a child who was simply hungry. She was eating like someone who didn't know when the next good meal would come. I sat there watching her. After finishing about half of her burger, she quietly started wrapping the rest in a napkin. "What are you doing?" I asked. She looked at me with genuine confusion, as if the question itself was strange. "Saving it." "For what?" she shrugged. "For tomorrow." Those 3 words changed something inside me. For tomorrow. An 11-year-old child was saving food for tomorrow. I turned toward the window so she wouldn't see the anger building on my face. After we left the diner, we headed toward my parents' house. Within minutes, Olivia had fallen asleep. Her breathing slowly settled into a peaceful rhythm. As I drove, I glanced over at her and noticed her shoes. There were visible streaks of glue across the front. It looked like someone had tried to repair them multiple times. My parents were not struggling financially. At least they hadn't been for the past year and a half. Just a few weeks earlier, my mother had posted pictures of her new convertible on social media. Before that, she had posted photos from a cruise vacation. My father had recently purchased a brand new SUV, yet the child living in their house was wearing shoes that were falling apart. By the time we arrived, dawn was still a little while away, but every light in the house was on. I parked the car and stared at the house for several seconds. If a child is accidentally left behind at a hospital, what do normal people do? They panic. They call the police. They call the hospital. They call relatives. But nothing about this house looked like a place filled with worried people. I walked up and knocked on the door. It opened almost immediately. My mother was standing there holding a coffee mug. She looked at me. Then she looked toward the car, then back at me. "Hannah," she said, "what are you doing here?" I stared at her for a few seconds. That should not have been the first question. The first question should have been, "Where's Olivia?" Or, "Is she okay?" Instead, she asked, "What are you doing here?" My father appeared behind her. "What happened?" he asked. I answered directly. Olivia was left alone at the hospital for 10 hours. Silence filled the doorway. Then my father let out a long breath. "We were going to pick her up." The answer came so quickly that it sounded rehearsed. "At 2 in the morning?" I asked. A flash of irritation crossed his face. My mother jumped in. "Hannah, you're blowing this out of proportion." Blowing this out of proportion. That was the second sentence I mentally filed away, because people often try to minimize a problem before they try to solve it. I glanced toward the car where Olivia was still asleep. Then I asked, "Does she eat properly every day?" My father answered immediately, "Of course." Then why was she saving her food for tomorrow? This time, neither of them spoke, only for 2 or 3 seconds. But sometimes 3 seconds of silence reveal more truth than 300 words. Finally, my mother said, "Kids do strange things." Maybe, but children don't randomly learn to hide food for no reason. I didn't argue. Not then. I simply told Olivia goodnight and got back into my car. On the drive home, I didn't go straight to my apartment. Instead, I stopped at a gas station and bought a coffee. While standing there, I opened social media. My mother's profile was one of the first things I saw. Her latest post had been uploaded only a few hours earlier. I opened the photo. My parents were smiling inside a casino. The caption read, "Finally having a little fun." I checked the timestamp. 8:42 p.m., the exact time Olivia had already been sitting alone in that hospital for hours. I took a screenshot, then another, then another. Because I was slowly beginning to realize that this wasn't the story of one bad night. This was something much bigger, and I had a feeling that the truth was only beginning to reveal itself. For the next few days, I kept telling myself that maybe I was overthinking everything. Maybe the hospital incident had really been an honest mistake. Maybe Olivia saving food was just a habit. Maybe the worn-out shoes were simply the result of carelessness. But every time I tried convincing myself of that, another question appeared. 3 days later, I called Olivia after school. At first, our conversation was completely normal. She told me about a math test she had taken. Then she talked about a new library book she was reading. Then, out of nowhere, she said, "Grandma got mad at me today." I immediately pulled a notebook closer. Why? I opened the pantry. My grip tightened around my pen, and it was locked. I sat in silence for several seconds. The pantry was locked? Yeah. She said it as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Why? Olivia answered without any emotion. Grandma says if the pantry isn't locked, the food disappears too fast. I didn't say anything, because only one thought was running through my mind. A house with brand new cars. A house where thousands of dollars had recently been spent on vacations. A house where a child lived, and inside that same house, food was kept behind a lock. That night, I started looking into Olivia's school records for the first time. I wasn't a detective, but I had spent the last 12 years working in financial compliance investigations. My entire career had been built around finding the difference between what people said and what they actually did. The next morning, I received an email from the school. At first, I assumed it was some routine notification, but when I opened it, I saw that emergency contact records for students were being updated. I downloaded the attached file. I wasn't expecting to find anything important. A few minutes later, I found myself staring at the screen. Olivia's attendance report was attached. I read the numbers twice, then a third time. 14 absences, 9 tardies, in a single semester. That wasn't normal, not even close. I kept reading. Near the bottom was a note from one of her teachers. Student frequently asks permission to take leftover breakfast items home. Student appears unusually concerned about food waste. I leaned back in my chair. There it was again, food. Every path seemed to lead back to the same thing. The hospital, the crackers, the burger, the locked pantry, and now school breakfast. I printed the report and placed it into a folder. By that point, it wasn't just a folder anymore. It was slowly becoming a case file. That evening when I called Olivia, she told me she had gotten an extra cookie at school. "Oh yeah?" I asked. "Yeah." "Did you eat it?" There was a brief silence. Then she answered, "No." "Why not?" "I put it in my backpack." I closed my eyes. "For tomorrow?" "Yeah." She said it so casually, as if she were talking about something completely ordinary. But it wasn't ordinary. An 11-year-old child should not be worried about saving a cookie for tomorrow. I changed the subject, but after we hung up, I sat there for a long time. Slowly, another question started forming in my mind. If money wasn't the problem, then why was this happening? I got the first piece of that answer 2 days later, and it was completely unexpected. I was scrolling through social media when a new post from my mother appeared. This time, she was standing inside a jewelry store. She had the same smile she wore in every photograph. I was almost ready to keep scrolling. Then something caught my attention. A small detail. In the reflection of the display case glass, I could see part of a price tag. I zoomed in, then zoomed in again. The image was blurry, but not completely. It was just clear enough to read the price. $2,380. I stared at the screen. $2,380. For a necklace. Immediately I thought about Olivia's shoes. Those same worn-out shoes. The same child who saved cookies. The same child who believed food was expensive. A little while later, my phone rang. It was Olivia. I answered immediately. Hi, sweetheart. Her voice was quiet. Aunt Hannah. Yeah? Can I ask you something? Of course. Several seconds passed. Then she asked a question that kept me awake all night. Am I expensive? My breath caught in my throat. What? Grandma says I cost a lot of money. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then she continued. I just wanted to know if I'm really that expensive. In that moment, I realized the real problem wasn't just food. It wasn't just neglect. It wasn't just money. Someone had convinced this little girl that her very existence was a burden, and that was far more dangerous than hunger. Very gently, I said, No, Olivia, you are not expensive. Really? Really? She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she softly said, Okay. But from the sound of her voice, I could tell she didn't fully believe me. And right then, I made a decision. I wasn't going to keep asking questions. I was going to find answers. Because I was beginning to suspect that my parents weren't just hiding something. They were hiding an entire story. And that story was probably much bigger than I had ever imagined. That night, I barely slept at all. Every time I closed my eyes, Olivia's voice echoed through my mind. Am I expensive? An 11-year-old child only asks a question like that when someone has repeatedly made her feel like a burden. The next morning, I tried to focus on work, but my mind was somewhere else. By lunchtime, I was sitting at my desk staring at the folder that now contained everything I had collected so far. The hospital incident, the school reports, the locked pantry, the worn-out shoes, the social media photos. Individually, each piece seemed small, but when they were placed together, the picture looked completely different. That was when an email appeared on my phone. It was from Olivia's teacher. I opened it immediately. She explained that the school would be holding a special award ceremony the following month and that Olivia would be receiving recognition as well. Then there was one additional sentence. We hope a family member will be able to attend this time. I read that sentence twice. Then I called her. A few minutes later, we were talking. At first, the conversation was fairly ordinary, but gradually her tone became more serious. Ms. Brooks, she said, I'm not making any accusations, but there's something I'd like to share with you. I stayed quiet. She's always worried about other people, the teacher continued. How so? I asked. If we hand out snacks in class, she wants to make sure every other student gets one first. If there are leftovers, she asks whether she can take them home. If a pencil breaks, she hesitates to ask for a replacement. A heavy feeling settled in my chest. Then the teacher added something else. Sometimes I feel like she spends all her energy trying not to be a burden to anyone. I swallowed hard. Does she seem happy? I asked softly. There was a brief pause. Then she answered, She's a good child, but happy and good aren't the same thing. After the call ended, I sat at my desk for a long time. Then I started digging through my brother Ethan's old records. Ethan had always been an organized person. He kept everything, insurance documents, tax records, investment accounts, everything. I spent several hours reviewing files. By evening, I found something that made my pulse quicken. Life insurance. I already knew Ethan and Melissa both had life insurance policies. I had simply never looked at the numbers before. Now I did, and for several seconds I just stared at the screen. The amount was enormous, large enough to comfortably raise a child, large enough to make any claim of financial hardship seem ridiculous, large enough that for the first time I realized this story might not be about survivor benefits alone. There might be much more money involved. That night, I wrote down another question. Where did the money go? Over the next several days, I began searching through public records. Little by little, more information surfaced. A new SUV, a new convertible, a boat, a storage unit, vacations, expensive restaurants, jewelry. Every new discovery made the question even bigger. Then one evening, my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar. I answered. A woman was on the other end. She introduced herself. She worked at the same bank where my parents held accounts. She didn't reveal any confidential information. She couldn't. But she did say something that immediately got my attention. People have been talking about your parents for the past few months. I frowned. What kind of talking? She paused for a moment before answering. Let's just say that some people find the difference between their lifestyle and their reported income unusual. The call ended, but the impact didn't, because that was exactly what I did for a living. Differences between income and spending. That was where the truth usually hid. That night, I laid out every piece of information again, and for the first time, I felt like I was getting very close to something significant. Then my phone rang again. This time, it was Olivia. The moment she spoke, I knew something was wrong. She sounded scared. Aunt Hannah? What happened? For several seconds, all I could hear was her breathing. Then she spoke quietly. I think Grandma checked my phone. I sat up straight. Why do you think that? She asked me what we talk about. My heart started pounding. And? She said I shouldn't tell people family business. I didn't say anything because suddenly I realized something. My parents weren't just lying, they were afraid. And when people become afraid of the truth, it usually means the truth is getting very close. After that night, everything started moving faster than ever before. I couldn't stop thinking about what Olivia had said. If my parents were suddenly concerned about what she was telling me, then one thing was clear. They were afraid. And people become afraid when they realize cracks are starting to appear in the wall of lies they've built. Over the next several weeks, things moved so quickly that there were moments when I could hardly believe it was really happening. More school records surfaced. Medical records started coming in. The list of missed appointments kept growing. Several checkups that should have happened months earlier had never taken place. Meanwhile, the spending continued. New purchases, new trips, new bills, new photos. Then one day, the thing I had been waiting for finally happened. An official investigation began. At first, questions came from the school. Then medical records were reviewed. Then investigators started examining the funds that were supposed to be used for Olivia's care. For the first time, I felt like this was no longer my word against theirs. Now the records were speaking, and records don't lie. At first, my parents denied everything. According to them, everything was fine. Olivia was happy, healthy, safe. She lacked nothing. Every concern was dismissed as a misunderstanding. Every question was described as an exaggeration. But little by little, the excuses stopped working. Because every answer was met with a document. Every claim was met with a record. Every story was met with a fact. Eventually, the day arrived when we had to appear in court. Even now, I can still remember that morning. Olivia sat beside me. She was holding my hand tightly. I could feel how nervous she was. Truthfully, so was I. But for the first time, I felt like things might finally change. The hearing lasted for hours. Many people spoke. Attorneys spoke. Officials spoke. Teachers spoke. Medical records were read. Financial documents were presented. Then came the moment I will never forget. The judge looked directly at Olivia. His voice was calm. He asked only one question. Olivia, if you could change one thing, what would it be? The entire courtroom fell silent. Olivia looked down. Then she looked at me. Then she looked back at the judge and quietly said, I just want to stop being scared all the time. Several people in the courtroom lowered their eyes because hearing an 11-year-old child say that she simply wanted to stop being afraid was more powerful than any report. A few months later, the final ruling was issued. My parents' guardianship was terminated. The court determined that Olivia's needs had been neglected and that resources intended for her care had not been properly used. And then, Olivia came to live with me. The day she arrived, she had only 2 suitcases. Just 2. Her entire life fit inside 2 suitcases. The first few months weren't easy. Many nights I would walk into her room and find snacks hidden away. Sometimes cookies, sometimes chips, sometimes granola bars. One time, I even found an entire bag hidden under her bed. I asked her, "Why are you hiding all this food?" She looked embarrassed, then quietly answered, "What if I need it later?" That answer broke my heart, because she was still living as though everything could disappear at any moment. But slowly, things began to change. Very slowly, but steadily. A few months later, she stopped hiding food. Then she stopped apologizing for every little thing. Then she stopped being afraid to ask for something she needed. And then one day, I witnessed something that made me realize she was truly beginning to heal. I was standing in the kitchen when she came home from school. She opened the refrigerator, grabbed a juice, made herself a sandwich. and walked away without saying a word. Then I found myself smiling, because she hadn't asked me. She hadn't asked whether she was allowed to eat. She hadn't asked whether she was costing too much money. She hadn't asked whether she was a burden. She simply got something to eat, the way every child should. A year later, she was honored at school once again. This time, I was sitting in the very front row. When her name was called, she looked directly at me from the stage and smiled. It wasn't a smile of relief. It wasn't a smile of fear. It wasn't even a smile of gratitude. It was simply happiness. Real happiness. After the ceremony, we went out to dinner together. We were eating and talking when I suddenly realized something. She hadn't saved a single bite of her meal. Not one. No napkin. No hiding food. No for tomorrow. Just eating like a normal kid. I watched her quietly. Then she laughed and asked, "What?" I shook my head. Nothing. But the truth was, I remembered everything. The hospital, the crackers, the burger, the locked pantry, the worn-out shoes, the fear. And then I looked at the same little girl sitting across from me, a little girl who was finally safe. A few months ago, I found an old photograph. It had been taken shortly after Olivia first came to live with me. There was exhaustion in her eyes, worry on her face. She looked older than her years. Then I looked up, and there she was, laughing with her friends while playing video games. That was the moment I realized something. Healing doesn't always happen all at once. Sometimes healing happens so slowly that you don't even notice it. Until one day, you look back and realize everything has changed. If you've listened to this story all the way to the end, thank you. Take care of yourself. Take care of the people you love, and remember, sometimes changing someone's life can be as simple as answering the phone. Goodbye.